Let me make a number of points. First of all, I do not think that the United States is interested in restarting the air war, which is really what the fighting involved between Iran and the United States. It's very important to understand that between February 28th and April 8th, what you had was an air war. It was basically a 40-day air war. And then the air war stopped. And what the United States then did was it imposed a blockade on the strait. So we went from this bombing campaign to a blockade. And except for a couple tit-for-tat incidents, there has been no serious bombing since April 8th. And the blockade went from roughly April 13th to June 17th, when the memorandum of understanding was signed. So we really have not had a serious shooting war between Iran and the United States since April 8th. And I do not believe the United States wants to start that air war all over again, because it would just lose the fight like it lost between February 28th and April 8th. The United States did not win with its bombing campaign. And of course, it was not just the United States, it was the United States and Israel. And then, as I say, we went to the blockade, and the blockade didn't work. That's why you had a memorandum of understanding that was signed on the 17th of June, right? It was signed because the blockade didn't work. So the bombing didn't work and the blockade didn't work. The point here is that the United States doesn't have a military option. So what happened is that the United States signed the memorandum of understanding, as I said, on June 17th. And in my opinion, that represented a clear victory for Iran. It may be the case, as Dr. Marandi said, that Iran did not get all it wanted, but it got most of what it wanted. And in my opinion, it looks like a surrender document from the American perspective. The Iranians won on almost every point. But the key here is that it's not a formal settlement to the conflict. It's just a memorandum of understanding. It's a basis for negotiations moving forward. And the question is, how is this going to play out? I think that's the question that you're asking me. What do I think is going to happen moving forward? And as you pointed out, there's some evidence that the Americans are interested in renegotiating the deal. And this is hardly surprising because, as I said, the June 17th deal looks like a victory for Iran. Now, let me say a few words about the specifics as I see it. The initial agreement was designed to open the strait and stop the war. But as I said, the war, except for Lebanon, let's leave Lebanon aside for the moment, except for Lebanon, the war had basically stopped on April 8th. There was not much shooting after April 8th. But the blockade mattered greatly, and the blockade went away. Now, what's happened, and this is reflected in some comments that J.D. Vance made, is that because the strait is now opened, the Americans feel, or the administration seems to feel, that the pressure on the United States to concede these various elements of the memorandum of understanding to Iran have lessened. There's not much pressure there anymore, so Vance seems to think, and therefore maybe we can renegotiate the deal because the strait is likely to stay open. So that's the basic logic here. I would be curious to know what Dr. Marandi thinks, but I think this logic is fundamentally flawed because the Iranians made sure that the nuclear element of the deal would not come until the end. And the United States absolutely needs to get a nuclear agreement. And to get that nuclear agreement, the Iranians can force the Americans to make major concessions on all of those other elements that are clearly laid out already in the memorandum of understanding. One is the business of frozen assets being released. Two is the matter of reparations and this $300 billion fund. Four is total relief on sanctions. And number four is the toll booth. Those are the four big issues floating around. Now, the Americans will try as hard as they can not to accommodate, not to agree to those particular economic demands. But what the Iranians can simply do is say, if you don't agree to those economic demands, we will not reach an agreement on the nuclear issue. And the Americans absolutely need an agreement on the nuclear issue. So I think the Iranians were very smart to put the nuclear issue at the tail end of the negotiations, because that will give them continued leverage now that the strait has been opened and that Iranian leverage has been taken away. So I would imagine, and it's very hard to say for sure, that moving forward, it's unlikely that the air war, the bombing campaign, is going to start again, because it just doesn't make sense from an American point of view. And number two, I think because of the importance of getting a deal on the nuclear issue, the various other economic issues, which are all to Iran's advantage, will be fulfilled. And that at the end, you will probably get an agreement that reflects what is in the memorandum of understanding. Am I sure this is going to happen? Of course not. But when I look at all the elements of the deal and what's happened so far, that's what it looks like to me.
Right. Professor Marandi, I'm going to come towards you along the same lines regarding the memorandum of understanding from Tehran's perspective. What are the biggest threats that you perceive are halting its, coming into full effect or its overall survival? Is it the U.S. delivering the assets, the frozen assets of Iran, Israeli escalation, which is a very important topic as far as Gaza or Lebanon are concerned, or Iran's own internal debates, because we witness that the public mood seems to be a little uncompromising on the streets of Iran. Very much, the sentiment is high, and as you've mentioned many times, that they do not want to have a deal like the JCPOA that has actually hurt Iran in the past. So what would Iran need to see from the United States that would kind of sort of establish a grudging trust as to things moving forward in the right direction?
Okay, sorry about that. That's the internet. They slowed the internet today for the funeral, and I guess because of a fear of drones or some sort of assault. You raise a very important question. The JCPOA, or the nuclear deal of 2015, did not go well for Iranians. And in that deal, the Iranians carried out their obligations, but the United States refrained from doing the same. And this was not under Trump, this was under Obama. And despite many complaints from the Iranian government, the foreign minister, and other high-ranking officials, the United States had no intention of fulfilling its obligations in full. It carried out some of them halfway and others less so. But for Iran, that wasn't enough. It wasn't helpful. And so many believed that it was a bad deal. Now, whenever we speak of negotiations nowadays in Iran, the first thing that comes to mind for ordinary people is the JCPOA. And that makes negotiating with the United States even more difficult, because whatever agreement you get, the mistrust towards the United States is very high, and for very, very good reason. So I understand the sentiments on the street. They make very in any case, this is the deal we have at the moment. I think the real issue, the number one issue that exists between Iran and the United States is the Israeli regime. I think that the Israelis do not want an improved relationship between Iran and the United States at any level. And so I think they will do whatever they can to undermine the agreement. So true, Lebanon is a big part of this, and the first article of the MOU, or the very first sentences in the MOU, deal with Lebanon. The Israeli regime is supposed to withdraw and end the war and end the killing. And at the moment, we have a ceasefire, although today they murdered a woman, a school principal, her husband, and her maid, I think, in an airstrike on their car. So it's not exactly a real ceasefire. It's sort of like the ceasefire in Gaza, where every day they kill a number of men, women, and children. But in Lebanon, it's not as murderous, at least for the moment. But they refuse to withdraw, and this is one way in which they can undermine the deal. Also, I have no doubt that they would not want to see the United States release Iranian assets or to cooperate with Iran in any way or form. The issue of the Strait of Hormuz is another problem. As we speak, the United States is violating the MOU by trying to or opening a corridor in the Strait of Hormuz that is not controlled by Iran. And that violates the deal because, in accordance with the deal, during the period of the MOU, Iran is supposed to be the country that controls the movement of ships through the strait. So I'm not totally optimistic about the deal. To be very blunt, I'm somewhat pessimistic that it will lead to a comprehensive agreement. At least now, I think Professor Mearsheimer is absolutely correct when he said that the Iranians were very smart in leaving the issue of the nuclear program and the comprehensive sanctions or the maximum pressure sanctions for the second phase, so that that leverage would remain for the time being. Because right now, the United States has partially fulfilled its side of the bargain. It has lifted the siege. It has lifted the sanctions on Iran's oil-related exports. But, as I said, it's violating the deal in the Strait. It's violating the deal in Lebanon because, effectively, in accordance with the MOU, they are responsible for the Israeli regime leaving. And also, they've so far refrained from releasing Iran's frozen assets. Now, some say that there has been some movement on that front, but at least for now, the assets still remain beyond the control of the Iranians. So the nuclear program is important leverage. And unless the Americans resolve these issues in the MOU for the first phase, the Iranians are not going to negotiate the nuclear program. So that is important leverage. Another important point that has to be kept in mind is that Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, and it can make the movement of ships through the strait more difficult. So Iran, in accordance with the deal, in the second month of the deal, the strait is supposed to be normalized with regards to the number of ships that go through. In other words, in a couple of weeks from now, the strait should look a bit like what it was 4 or 5 months ago, or let's say 5 months ago. So the Americans have their own leverage, the Iranians have their own leverage, but I think that, I don't think, I'm very confident that the Iranians are not going to be compromised. And after the events today, and what we're going to see in Iraq, because we are going to have a funeral procession in the holy cities of Najaf and Karbala, as well as in Qom in Iran, and then ultimately in the Mashhad, the holy city of Mashhad in northeastern Iran. So I think that the events today and the events in the subsequent days are going to spin Iran's resolve when it comes to the negotiating table in the next stage. And I don't think we're going to have I don't think we're going to have negotiations at a high level for the time being for this very same reason. We've had technical negotiations in Qatar, and we may have, I think, technical negotiations next week, perhaps in Islamabad. But since there's no movement in Lebanon, the Iranians have said that for the time being, they're not interested in having direct negotiations between Dr. Ghalibaf and Vance.